Hi, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be wrapping up all of the books that I read in May. My room is quite a mess right now, not gonna lie. I am in the process of organising all my stuff to ship home to Dublin and working out what stuff I want to give away and what things I want to keep. So everything's a mess and I'm trying to sort my life out, but I have found a little bit of time for me to film some videos today. So I'm just gonna get into the wrap up. If you've been watching my previous wrap ups, you'll know I had some lukewarm reading months, but things definitely improved in May, and if June keeps going the way it's going, that is going to be a great reading month as well. So anyways, I'm going to start with the two non-fiction books that I read this month, the first of which was Doing It by Hannah Witten. I hauled this one fairly recently and I was really looking forward to reading it. Hannah Witten is a really well-known YouTuber. She talks about sex and relationships and is really sex positive, and her book is no different. This book explores a number of different topics in and around sex and relationships. There's some really helpful advice about the concept of virginity, about unhealthy relationships, lots of LGBT stuff in there. And for the topics that Hannah doesn't have first-hand experience in, she gets guest writers in like Juno Dawson and Cal McSwiggan. I thought this was a really excellent book. My one issue with it was that I'm probably not the target audience for it. This book is for anyone, but it is aimed at those that are around 14 plus. That's like quite young, and I am someone who is really interested in sex, and I've always been really sex positive, familiar with a lot of the material in there, which meant I was skim reading a lot of it. But other things like trans woman perspective from Juno Dawson is something that I think as a cisgendered person can never do any harm to refamiliarize with myself with. So I thought this was a really excellent book. Wasn't really for me, but I would definitely recommend it to maybe a younger or less experienced person than myself. This month I also read Hidden Figures by Margot-Lee Shetterly, and I thought this was a really great book, but it wasn't really what I expected. This book is about the role that African American women played in the space race in America. It looks at female mathematicians, engineers, and the incredibly important role they had. I think these are really important real life stories that we should be aware of, and I think this book is a prime example of how those that write history control who is represented, which means that some stories slip through the cracks, which is really, really unfortunate. I think the subject matter of this book is incredibly important, but as a book, I didn't have an incredible reading experience with it. I was really interested in the stories of these women, and I was really interested in contextualizing that within what I already knew about the civil rights movement. I was obsessed with the civil rights movement when I studied history in school. In terms of the technological side of it, there was a lot of information about the technology that was implemented during the space race, and that just completely went over my head, and I wasn't really interested in learning about technological developments in the same way that I was really interested in learning about social developments. So a lot of those sections of the book were not something that I really enjoyed. I do really want to watch the film adaptation of this book because I think it would be a more productive way for me personally to consume these histories. I thought this was a really important read nonetheless, and I would highly recommend it, especially if you think you will get on with the history of technology as well. This month I also read a graphic novel, which I'm pretty sure I have not done yet this year. I read the first edition of Lumbridge James, which is by a number of illustrators and writers, including Noelle Stevenson, who you may know for Nimona. So this is about a group of 5 female friends who go off to this sort of summer camp, and they are determined to have an awesome summer together. They end up going on this insane quest with an array of supernatural creatures, and that's essentially all that really happens in this graphic novel. There's not much to say about it other than that. I thought it was a really, really enjoyable reading experience. I love consuming graphic novels really, really quickly. This particular graphic novel wasn't really something that left me thinking a lot afterwards, but it was just a really enjoyable half hour or so. I thought the art was really great, and I thought it was really funny. So if you're interested in checking out a new graphic novel, I would definitely recommend Lumbridge James, and I'm really looking forward to picking up the second installment of it when I can. I also read a poetry collection this month, and that was The Chaos of Longing by K.Y. Robinson. So this is a poetry collection about love and heartbreak and trauma and unhealthy relationships. It is divided into 4 different sections which explore different avenues in those themes. I would probably put this poetry collection in the category of poetry like Ruby Kaur's Milk and Honey or Amanda Lovelace's The Princess Saves Herself in this one. It's very similar to those two collections. So that's not my favourite kind of poetry. I think that poetry definitely has its place, and I think it's really accessible, and I think the reading experience of it is worth going through and experiencing, but as poetry it didn't leave any sort of large impact on me, or it didn't impress me in what it was doing. So I would include that collection in that sort of category of poetry. But what this book did that those other collections didn't really do for me was that it engaged with things that I wasn't familiar with. And it brought ethnicity into play as well, which I think added a more interesting dimension for me because it was something that I've not considered when thinking about love and sexuality and relationships. So I found this one much more interesting than those other two collections because it brought in that other theme. And it did stop and make me think a little bit more. If you enjoyed Milk and Honey, you will really enjoy this collection. And I know a lot of people have really enjoyed Milk and Honey, so I would recommend this one. This month I also read The Other Half of Happiness by Ayesha Malik, and this is the second book in the sort of Sophia Khan series of books. I absolutely devoured Sophia Khan Is Not Obliged. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I enjoyed this one less, but I still really enjoyed the reading experience of it. In this book, we are following Ayesha's married life. It involves the revelation of a secret from her husband that really puts a huge strain on their relationship. And I found myself really frustrated at times because of their lack of ability to communicate. I'm not sure how realistic I found it that they would settle into a marriage without discussing things like that. And I'm not sure I thought Sophia would react the way that she did, given the character that was built up in the first novel. But in saying that, that could be the result of being in a relationship that wasn't good for her. While I didn't think this book was as strong as the first one, I still definitely enjoyed it, and I'm really enjoying the experience of having light and easy reads that are still really informative for me about a culture that I'm not really that familiar with. And I actually found the representation of Irish culture in this book to be actually pretty good. It's definitely a more rural viewpoint than I would say is my experience of Ireland. It was recognisable without being stereotypical or insulting. Would highly recommend it. I think she's got a really strong and funny voice. This month I also read Paradise by Toni Morrison, and this was the very last book that I needed to read for university. I have finished university very recently and I will be talking about that soon. And what a fantastic book this was to finish up on. So this follows a number of different individuals and it is told from various different perspectives. It is about a town that has been set up called Ruby. This town was set up by a number of men in order to protect the women in their lives and shield them from racial prejudice. This is a book about gender, it is about race, and it is also a book about history. In this novel, we are exploring the construction of history and how that construction can be used to control people. We're looking at intergenerational conflicts, and there's also a little bit of magical realism thrown into the mix as well. I really enjoyed reading this book. I actually did a presentation on it. That was my final piece of university coursework, and I found out the result of that the other day, and it is one of the highest grades that I ever received, and I'm really delighted about that. I discussed to what extent this book is a postmodern novel. Spoiler alert, it is. And I spoke about the construction of history and alternative histories. This is by no means an easy read. It is a read that you need to focus on a lot and devote a lot of brain power to. But if you are up for that, I would highly recommend it, and I am really looking forward to trying out some more of Toni Morrison's work. Next up is a book that has been on my TBR possibly longer than any other book on my shelf. It's definitely up there, and that is The Shock of the Fall by Nathan Filer, and I had heard nothing but incredible things about this book. So this book follows the mental health story of a boy named Matt following the death of his brother Simon. It deals with schizophrenia mainly, and as far as my understanding and my further research on this book goes, the representation of that is done really, really well. The narration of this book is done in such a way that it's not always clear what's going on, and the history of the brother's death isn't always clear. So we are piecing that together through the narration as we go on. I wasn't so much interested in the revelation of how exactly that happened. I was much more interested in listening to how the narrators brain worked, how he saw things differently to how I would, how he understood situations in a way that was different to how I would see them. I've always really enjoyed books like that, books like The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime or Alice and the Fly. They are books that have really stayed with me. Even books like Room, books that are just narrated in such a way that it's a way of thinking that I don't experience, and books that really cleverly get you to empathize with the narrator in that way. If you are interested in mental health, not just mental health itself, but the care and treatment that is involved in managing mental illness, then I would really recommend this book. I also really enjoyed and appreciated how the author used the space on the page and used different fonts and also illustrations. I thought they were really, really great and they really added to the story. I thought this was a really fantastic book. And the final book I'm going to talk about is The Magicians by Lev Grossman, and this is one of my favourite books of all time, and I was really scared about rereading it because I wasn't sure if it would change my view on it at all. It did slightly. Some of my fears were realised. I had a feeling it was slightly misogynistic in places, and it was, but that didn't detract from my enjoyment of the themes in this book because I absolutely love the ideas that are played with here. So this is about a boy named Quentin who is about to go to university until he is whisked away to this magical exam for this magical university. He's accepted into the university and the story continues from there. This is about why we want to go to magical worlds and realizing that we idealize them so much. It is also about living in the present and not hoping for the next thing that is going to make you happy. It is about appreciating what you have now and appreciating the happiness that you have now. It is such a page turner, and I always recommend this to people who are interested in thinking critically about fantasy stories like Harry Potter, like Narnia. I still haven't read the second and third books in this series, and I kind of don't want to because I think this book just works so perfectly as it is. If you've read the further books in this series, then let me know if you enjoyed them because I'm wondering if I should pick them up. So they are all the books that I read in May. I had a much better reading month. I think I read like 8 books maybe. I'm just feeling a lot better about my reading now. Anyways, I'm going to continue getting on with my packing. Let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. Are you interested in reading them now that I've shared my thoughts on them? Do let me know down below, and I will talk to you guys in a few days.